Hello, everyone. I am Cliff White of Strong Machine Adventure Racing and joined on a frigid winter Wednesday evening here with adventure racing legend Bob Miller. Can you be a legend if you're still winning races?
I don't know.
Um, so excited to have Bob here. Besides having an illustrious history in the sport, he is the race director for the Wilderness Traverse, which is going to be the Adventure Racing World Series North America Series Championship in 2025. And we're going to talk a little bit about that race and um, he is also on his team, Team Canada Adventure. Is it Team Canada Adventure there? Is that the right
Yeah,
team name?
that's it. That's
Uh,
it.
the winners of the inaugural ARWS North America Series Championship, which was in Pennsylvania in October. So he crossed the border with his team and raided the trophy case here. Um, but yeah, we're going to talk about the series, the race, his team's race in Pennsylvania, and the state of AR, and especially in Canada, where Canada will be hosting the World Championship in September of 2025 out in BC. I've done Expedition Canada twice and can't recommend that race highly enough. It's a super special place, and the race is really fun, great terrain, and a nice challenge while giving you a real taste of everything you want in an adventure race. So a little plug for that. And yeah, so I think I'll just start with Wilderness Traverse because that's um, the race we're going to encourage people to sign up for as a prep or potentially to win a free entry to Canada. Uh, or is it the next one? You
I
win
think
the
it's the
race.
next one.
Okay, sorry,
It'll be
which is
France.
right in France.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's still a pretty
which,
good prize.
yeah, yeah, it is. So yeah, Bob, tell me about the history of Wilderness Traverse, and then we'll get into your racing.
Yeah, so we were lucky in Ontario, Canada, kind of back in the day, early 2000s, late 90s. There were loads of races. We had quite a few series. There was probably four competing series happening for a lot of years. And then things started to die down and the series started to drop off. But there were some great races. Kind of the original longer, like 24 to 36-hour races were Raid the Norths, hosted by Frontier Adventure Racing. And the organizer of that series, Dave Zeitzma, and also Lawrence Foster designed a lot of those courses. They kind of really introduced what I would call like an expedition racing feel in a shorter, like overnight format, was their style of course design. And that's kind of what I've tried to maintain with Wilderness Traverse. But for different reasons, those series kind of slowly went away. Participation dropped a bit. It's challenging, as other organizers know, Cliff, to organize adventure races. It takes a lot of time and effort and resources. So unfortunately, a lot of those races started to die off. And then really we were out for lunch after an orienteering race one day, group of friends, and they kind of egged me on to start up a new 24-hour race because there weren't any around kind of thing. So that's kind of what started it. I'd been helping organize some of those events for the other race organizers over the years, so it wasn't totally out of my realm to jump into that, but that's kind of how it got started. So we wanted to continue with that style of course. So that's kind of what we try and do at Wilderness Traverse. It's longer legs, lots of distance between checkpoints. It'll be quite different than what we had in Pennsylvania. But I think a lot of the way we design and different race directors design courses lends itself to the topography and kind of the terrain you have available to you. So, we might not have a lot of checkpoints in a wilderness traverse race, but you'll be ticking off features all the time, making sure you're staying on track. So, yeah, it's just different. But we're blessed with, some good wilderness around here as well. We have a lot of lakes. There's thousands of lakes. Canoe tripping. Most kids in high school or, growing up, they'll go on canoe trips with their families. There's like tons of portages between all these lakes. And then obviously we have Georgian Bay and Lake Huron, where a lot of the wilderness surrounds some of the larger lakes. So canoeing's a big pastime in our part of the world. And then what we lack in elevation, like big mountainous terrain, we make up for with a lot of forest. There's still a lot of forest here. A lot of what we call crown land, public land, where we can, race through and design a lot of fun things to do. So those are kind of the elements that lend themselves to the style of race that we like to organize. So yeah.
I hear some of your canoe sections involve putting a canoe over your head with your hands.
This is true. Yes, there is lots of port. I think our longest probably it was between 7 or 8 kilometers of portaging in a section, not at one time, but like over the course of a 30 to 40 kilometer paddling leg. But the canoes are very light. That's actually another thing we're blessed with. There's a lot of outfitters. Algonquin Park is like one of the biggest provincial parks. It's probably one of the larger parks in Canada. And canoe tripping's huge in there. So they have some really big outfitters that have like hundreds of canoes. But they're really light. They weigh like 40 to 50 pounds. So putting them on your head is not too challenging. Yeah, and you'll see teams running with canoes on their heads in the race for sure. So it's kind of a unique trait for our racers, but yeah.
So your race has had various formats. I've seen like kind of a clover leaf where you're coming back to home base for different legs, and I've seen larger loop courses and one big loop. I've seen various formats through the years. Can you give us a little insight on what your race is going to look like this year in terms of format?
Yeah, so usually the terrain, so I guess kind of taking a step back and how we design the course is first we'll look for those kind of like marquee legs, like, where is there a big paddle? Where can we get in and get out of a wilderness area for paddling? Um, Trekking usually isn't as difficult to find. There's a lot of wilderness and a lot of bush, so we can usually piece together trekking legs and it's usually pretty good. And then where are the biking trails? That's actually becoming more challenging is finding good biking trails. Depending on the area. We used to use a lot of snow machine or snowmobile trails. Because there's like apparently there's as many snowmobile trails in Ontario as there are major highways. It's like they're all over the place. Snowmobiling's a big business up here. So we used to follow those trails, and then ATVing's been becoming more popular lately. And unfortunately, that doesn't do great things to the AT or the snowmobile trails because a lot of the ground can be soft in a lot of these areas, and they chew it up, and then it's no fun to bike on that stuff. So it used to be we would look for snow machine trails, but now we're kind of looking more toward logging roads and less well used roads just to make it so it's not a total mud fest. And then if we can, we'll try and piece in some single track parks. A lot of the single track in Ontario is based in like small areas. So it's very loopy, which doesn't lend well to a large point to point type race. But for this race, we have a few kind of course ideas that we're working towards, and we're just waiting on permitting and seeing what's going to work out. So I actually don't know the final version of the course right now. There's a few options, but it most likely will be point to point in nature. We're looking at busing out to some area, and then teams will be making their way back. So um, I like the idea of feeling like you're going somewhere. You're on like a journey, or you're kind of moving through the terrain and feeling like you're going somewhere. So that's what I'm aiming for with this course for sure.
So, as we saw with the first ARWS North America Championship, there was a pretty solid field that showed up for that. Are you making any special provisions for maybe having a faster top end of the field for the race? I mean, you always get 4 or 5 really fast teams that show up and duke it out for the win, but are you doing anything different this year because it's the championship?
Not really. I think um like you said, we usually have some of the top teams in Canada racing. So we usually plan for a first place team finishing the full course anywhere around 20 hours, give or take, is the goal, and that'll be the goal again with this race. I think we finished in Pennsylvania. We were under 20 hours in that race, so it'll be in that range. It'll be between 18 and 22 hours, I think, for the top team finishing. And then obviously we have different course options. We design it with like 3 different types of courses. And if teams don't make cutoffs, they'll either get moved onto a short course, or they'll skip a section, or we'll have figured out a different section for them to make it back in time to make the cutoff. So we want to have as many teams finish as possible is the goal for sure.
It's really good to hear you say that because I've found as a race director and uh, the front of the pack tends to take up a lot of mind space as you're planning the course in terms of logistics to make sure the TAs are open, the boats are there, and then uh, you worry also about the back of the field, making sure they can get through the course. The middle sometimes gets forgotten about a little bit, but it sounds like you're taking that into account as well, and you really want everyone to have a good experience out there.
Yeah, that's actually what you just described reminds me a lot of the weekend executing the race. You're right, you're running around like crazy, making sure everything's set up and it's ready for the front of the field. And then after that's done, you maybe take a deep breath, and then it totally reverses and you start, focusing on the middle and the back of the pack, and, seeing how they're moving through and where they're getting turned around. And it always amazes me where teams struggle in the course. Usually it's not where we expect them. I mean, sometimes it is, but they'll often do things that are totally unexpected, which is interesting from a race director point of view. But that's where our kind of race HQ staff comes in. We have a really good HQ staff. They've been working on the event for almost since inception, and they love coming to the race and tracking. So I think we have probably one of the larger HQ staffs for a 24-hour race. There's probably, our lead HQ staff member is Barb Campbell, who races a lot, and she's done a lot of racing. And then there'll be 6 to 8 other people, either, you know, doing media, but a lot of them are focused on the leaderboard. That's one thing we pride ourselves on, is having an up-to-date leaderboard and not relying on geofencing. And, it just doesn't do a great job of making sure the leaderboard's accurate if you really want to follow it precisely. So they're on top of that. We're lucky that most of our checkpoints are staffed, and there are fewer checkpoints. So our course design also makes it easier to kind of maintain that leaderboard. But yeah, they're on top of things for sure. So, and then as you said, they're watching all the teams and definitely following the back to pack and figuring out, where we're gonna have trouble and maybe having to pick people up or all that kind of fun stuff.
So you mentioned liking courses that take you somewhere that cover a distance and go from point A to point B or have a journey to them. Um, Does that come from your experience as a racer, or how would you say Wilderness Traverse has been influenced by your racing career?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment. For sure. With the longer expedition races, as you know, you're when you're covering those longer distances, I think it's more like a journey. And you're traveling somewhere, you're traveling through different terrain types and different areas. So I think that's influenced it to a degree, as well as kind of learning from some of the original organizers. And their background was racing in eco challenges. Like they started racing in eco challenges, and then they brought that style of race kind of to Ontario. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like when you go for a training ride, it's always more fun to like get dropped off somewhere and ride home or, run home or, do something point to point than going out for loops. So I don't know if it's just in our nature or everyone's nature, but it just seems like it's more fun when you're covering a good whack of distance.
So, speaking of racing, I mean, you're very much still actively racing, and I guess I just wanted to ask, like, why? Like, like, why is the fire still burning? You've done so much with your career, like, yeah, it's why are you still doing it?
That's a good question. We're not doing it a whole lot these days. So I mean the last world champs I raced in was 2013. And then we kind of got a team back together for Eco Challenge in Fiji in 2019. And then we hadn't done anything until they came up with the North American Championships last year. Hats off to Brenton Abbey for hosting a great race and taking on that challenge, being the first host of that event. But really, it was the world champs coming back to Canada that got us keen to try and race at a decent level again. I raced in the last race that was in Newfoundland. I don't know if it was 2003 or 4, I think, when the world champs were last in Canada. And that was an amazing course, amazing terrain. I mean, Canada has great terrain for expedition racing. Um, and then obviously racing in the Rockies out west. I've done some races out there before, and there's certainly some highlights from things I remember doing. So, um, my wife and I are also keen to try and do some racing together. We haven't done any, we've done some long Rogaines. She's been participating in Wilderness Traverse forever, but I'm always event directing. So, that was part of it too, is for us to, go on some adventures and do some fun things together. Um, so yeah, it just seemed like the time was right. Our kids are a bit older. They're 4 and 7 now, so still young, but we're kind of just figuring out if we can fit the training in and still be good parents and all that fun stuff. So it's interesting. Why not?
I was going to say we have a good audience here. If anyone wants to ask a question of Bob, you can put it in the chat, and I'll try and get to it, and maybe we can open it up towards the end. But uh, so you're not racing that frequently, yet you still managed to beat a very strong field in Pennsylvania. How do you do it?
That's a good question. I mean, I think probably up until I stopped racing in 2013, I was probably up there with the number of expedition races or races completed by an individual. I would imagine I was racing pretty crazy for about, 13 years. So there's a lot of experience there that I think helps. But you know what? I was curious too. You never know, especially when we did Eco Challenge and then these last North American champs, whether you can still keep up, whether the sports passed you by or, but I think all the old rules still hold. It's the same sport. You're going to suffer mentally, physically. That's always been a strength of mine is just being able to put your head down and keep going. So I don't think much has changed in that regard. And I do think we probably have more fun now than we used to. We're not as serious. Doesn't matter as much. I mean, we're still competitive. I've always been competitive. I participated in competitive sports growing up. So that side's always there when we're in the race. But I think we look now at the race as a larger picture and try not to get as stressed out early on, or if it's an expedition race through the early parts of the race, and maybe start focusing more when you're getting closer to the end. So,
The teammate aspect of things. I mean, I would say, now that I've been doing this sport for more than a decade, it's really hard to keep a team together and to keep them poised enough to go to a race and win it. How do you manage that? I mean, you managed to pull some pretty strong Canadian athletes into Eco Challenge with you. How are you able to build a team and keep it together?
uh, we're friends. It's just like we're lucky. We've known each other for a long time. We're good friends. And it's more like, you want to go on an adventure, let's do it type thing. So it's really the perfect recipe for a team when, you're strong athletes, but then you're also friends first and foremost. So Scott and I have known each other for over 20 years now. Ryan Atkins and I got to know each other working on some events. We were working on some obstacle course races. And even before that, we had some mutual friends in the mountain biking community. So we knew each other for years before we got him to do Eco Challenge. But Ryan's like the perfect athlete for adventure racing. He's got like this massive engine, very smart, very tactical, like He's he's born and bred for it. And then on the race course, he's like the happiest guy in the world, singing the whole time and all sorts of fun, crazy things. So he's really strong. And then of course with my wife, yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So I think we're lucky in that regard. I know from hosting events and racing for a long time, you're right, building the team can be one of, the hardest things. And I've got some crazy stories about trying to find teammates last minute and all sorts of silly things that happen when you're in the thick of it. But at this point, we're kind of lucky.
So I haven't seen a race report posted anywhere. Can you give us a recap or a overview of how the race in Pennsylvania went?
Uh, yeah, we did okay. I was struggling. I wasn't as fit as I should have been, maybe, and I was trying different fueling strategy. Eating more and getting more calories in is all the rage these days, and I thought I had a pretty strong stomach, so I was like, oh yeah, I'll try and, eat a bunch of these carbohydrate drinks and mix it with a lot of real food. And it didn't sit well with me. I was cramping at the end of the first trek, actually, onto the first bike. And then Ryan actually lost his front brake. His front disc fell off shortly into that first bike ride. So was it? No, it was his rear disc. His rear disc broke. So he was riding with just a front brake for the rest of the race. So things didn't go super smooth for us. So I was fighting GI issues most of the race after that, just trying to get my stomach settled. Um, but it was we were at the front and going back and forth with those other teams, kind of egging each other on to a degree. And we knew what the cutoffs were and what the estimates were, and that was kind of a carrot for us, was to try and stay ahead of those and keep us focused. But um, I think most of the top teams moved through the course quite smoothly until that final trek. And I think most of us knew that's where the race was gonna kind of come together, or fall apart, or whatever would happen on that last trek in the dark. It's the hardest thing teams do in wilderness traverse, and it's probably the hardest things teams do in most adventure races, is trekking in the dark. Especially with the intricate navigation that was required on that last stage. Yeah, we knew that was going to be probably the most challenging part, and we tried to really stay focused. Scott and I were, and Ryan too, but more Scott and I were working on the navigation together, and we were chatting kind of through the whole race, making sure we were on top of things as much as we could. And we maintained that through that last trek. We thought we'd blown it actually when we had our big mistake on one of the last checkpoints. I think we lost over an hour. We struggled a bit with one of the other checkpoints, but it maybe only cost us 10 or 15 minutes. But running in, we didn't know. We were just like, geez, did we blow it or are we going to be lucky? We're asking any of the other teams we saw coming back up that were just going onto the track. Have you seen anyone? What's going on? But no one had seen anyone yet. So we still weren't sure until we got to the finish line and found out. But yeah, and looking at the tracking afterwards, it was crazy seeing the struggles that all the top teams had. So hats off to Abby and Brent for setting a very challenging final leg.
So I was thinking about we've known each other for since I think around Eco Challenges when we met, the more recent one. Um, but I don't really know your origin story. Like I don't know how you got started in the sport. Can we like throw it back and you can tell me about your your
Well, it's
entrance?
probably the way a lot of people got started. It was watching those old Eco Challenge shows. Like I mentioned earlier, once it was around 98, 99 in Ontario when they started hosting kind of like uh like shorter races, like 5 to 8 hour races. There were some big series of 5 to 8 hour races in Ontario. So, I mean, I saw those longer races. Even around the same time, I think Southern Traverse was coming out. I can remember seeing like an early Southern Traverse website, thinking that would be a really cool thing to try and do one day. So yeah, the first year it was like me and a friend and his girlfriend decided we would try one of these shorter races. And then it kind of progressed from there. The next year I tried a 36-hour race, probably won the next year. And then the next year I was like totally hooked and I probably did like three 36-hour races. Um, and then the year after that was my first expedition race, which would have been Raid the North Extreme, the first Raid the North Extreme in Newfoundland, which I think was 2001. Um, but again, we were lucky. You could almost race every weekend within like 2 to 3 hours from where I lived. So I was racing like crazy, just trying to gain a lot of experience, not finishing a bunch of races as well, but again, learning all those hard lessons that we all learn. There was just a lot of opportunity to race. And then by 2002, we started doing better. I was on a team that qualified for the final Eco Challenge that was in Fiji. So I kind of caught that tail end of the first big wave of races. I never got to do a Raid Galois, or even a Raid World Championship as they kind of changed into. So I was kind of just finishing up as I was kind of ramping up. But then Primal Quest came out, that maintained for a while, and then the AR World Series kind of took off. But before adventure racing, I mostly played hockey growing up, team sports, that kind of thing. And then in university, a friend and I thought it would be a good idea to run a marathon. So we kind of got into that. And then I tried some triathlons and then kind of saw adventure racing and it was perfect. It kind of blended that endurance sport with the team aspect that I'd done a lot growing up. And then also the outdoors. I did outdoor education in high school, canoe tripping, hiking, that kind of stuff. So it just kind of brought everything together and it was like right up my alley. So yeah, I was hooked.
So, how would you describe the path that you took, or how did you get from going to just participating to actually competing? Like, um, what were the milestones or the um, moments in your recollection that brought you to that next level?
Yeah, I think it was just that progression of, finishing the shorter races. And then, okay, on the local level, we're starting to do well and we're winning some of the shorter, like 5 to 8 hour races. Still trying to figure things out for the longer, like 36-hour races. There were some very experienced teams in Canada in the early days, and they were racing like across the country, just doing like 36-hour and expedition races. So there was really good competition. And then starting to succeed in those 36-hour events, some podium finishes. And then, yeah, it was probably 2002 where we qualified. There was an Eco Challenge qualifier in Canada, and we managed to get on the podium in that event. But then, as you know, once you move to expedition length races, it's like a whole different sport almost compared to a 36-hour race. It's just a whole different set of mental toughness and emotions and things you have to work through. So it took a few years to figure that out. But I was lucky. I was approached by another friend, he now a good friend, Dave Corner. He had a sponsor. It was an old team called Supplier Pipeline. And through that sponsorship, I got to do a lot of racing over like probably about a 5 year span, like maybe 2 to 3 expedition races a year. So we were doing kind of okay, or not early on, but there was a lot of expedition races where we were learning the lessons the hard way for sure. But honestly, it was just a lot of racing and that drive to try and get better. But yeah, it probably was around like 2005, 2006 when I feel like we were really starting to compete for podium spots. The sport was still, well attended, very competitive. Like I think there was 80 to 100 teams at some of those Primal Quests. And I mean, there's still a lot of teams at the World Championships now, so I always wonder if it's as competitive, more competitive, less competitive. Are we that much faster? Is it similar? Like, yeah, it's really hard to tell. But I got to think the sport's gotten faster.
Yeah, it's a really fun debate to have. And I think you've bridged a little bit. There's a handful of lifers that it'd be good to get them all on a round table and get their opinions. Um, I think on the front end, it's probably pretty comparable at least, but the depth of the fields it seems like, well, I wasn't racing until 2013, 2014, but I would be curious like how the median team would do in like a 90s Eco Challenge versus a World Championship today. I'm curious. Uh, and yeah, it's I would love to let's get into the state of AR in a sec, but before we jump there, I guess I just wanted to round off the conversation with for anyone who's tuning in, yeah, like who's maybe we could start with um, like the beginners who see someone like you as having had so much success in the sport, like what would your advice to them be? And then we can do kind of those mid-pack teams.
Yeah, I mean, beginners, uh, I guess the first thing is expect that you're going to suffer mentally and physically in the sport. It's going to be tough, um, and get ready for that. Like it's part of the racing. Um, have good navigation. Find either learn, do a lot of races, do orienteering races, get someone on the team that can navigate. Doesn't matter how fast you go, if you're going the wrong way. So definitely focus on the navigation. Um, Obviously building a base of endurance in all the disciplines. we love to neglect paddling in North America for some reason, but focusing on all the disciplines, I think, is quite important. Getting that base of fitness will help. I always kind of said to myself, the more prepared I am and the fitter I am, the less I'm going to suffer in the actual race. And I think that holds true. Whereas if you can get that preparation and given your time. Um, and then the teamwork side and the team side is really hard to figure out for beginners, especially people coming from individual sport backgrounds and learning to work on a team and really just giving into the team and accepting that it's kind of like whatever you can do to help the team in that moment and not so much focusing on something negative that may be bothering you or holding you back, but how whatever action you're taking, how does that help move the team forward faster is kind of like a good rule to live by, and thinking that through. Because I mean, we see it, you see it in your races as we see it in our races. Like once negativity creeps into a team, it's like game over. Whereas the slower teams that are more positive, they'll finish every day. If they can stay happy and motivated and, singing along through the whole course, they're going to finish. So not letting negativity creep in it's really hard too. I mean, when you're tired and, don't want to be doing what you're doing anymore. This is where the mental toughness comes in. But yeah, you kind of have to anticipate that's going to happen and know it's going to happen, and then kind of work through it. So those would be my kind of key things for beginner racers.
And how about teams who are more experienced, but starting to think about instead of just finishing, starting to look to be more competitive? What would you suggest for them?
Yeah, I think for those teams, it's probably getting your systems figured out, making it so there's no surprises. Once you get more experience racing, there tend to be fewer surprises, but something always is going to come up. But then having systems in place to deal with that stuff, if there's a bike mechanical or someone's not feeling well, if they're sick for whatever reason, or if it's hypothermia or heat exhaustion or whatever it is, just knowing how to deal with that and handle that. And it's really hard until you've had those experiences. Someone can tell you how to deal with them, but really living them is what's going to drill home the lesson and really make you learn from it. So it is challenging, but certainly that's what we fall back on when we're racing, when the little things come up or the big things come up, what can we do quickly to solve this problem? And usually we've already experienced it, so we can, put in place that system to fix the problem and move on. But so it's like everything. It's like, when you're coming into transition areas, you have that plan in place. You can move through the TA quickly. That's something that still amazes me is how quickly the top teams move through the TAs and then how easy it is to get caught up in the comfort of a TA. And the mid to back of the pack teams will literally spend hours there. It's hard. It's like really hard to get out of there. But, if you want to get better, that's something you have to deal with. It's probably also getting more comfortable with being uncomfortable, I guess, to a degree. Don't go to the fire. Don't go well, getting the hot food, you're going to do that. But yeah, just kind of trying to move through those areas quickly. And then when things go wrong, being able to deal with those things and know how to get moving quickly again in the shortest amount of time possible.
So, one thing that's helped me an extraordinary amount, and I started trail running before I was an adventure racer, and then I had the same problem in adventure racing was, um, initially when I was just getting into the sport, I got very competitive, and I was just always looking around and, trying to beat that guy and that gal, and in adventure racing it was the same thing. It was like, well, I want to beat that team, and always looking sideways instead of ahead. And I credit in adventure racing. I know Bend Racing has a podcast, and they're really great about communicating a lot of their I wouldn't say necessarily strategies, but just advice. And a piece of advice that's stuck with me with adventure racing, I had to relearn it after learning it in trail running is, caring about your own race more than anyone else's race. But I am curious because I've never really raced at that top end in an expedition race. Like, are you looking at other teams and trying to measure your effort against theirs? It's interesting reading like Nathan Faave's race reports from the World Championships where they're like toying with the Swedish team and like we turned all our lights off and ran away from them, and it's like, holy cow, like they're a next level, of course. But what's your perspective on competitive outlook in these races?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's definitely changed over the years. You're right. It when I was racing a lot and taking it very seriously, and not that we're not taking it seriously now, but yeah, there was a lot of that. You were racing and you felt like you were on the whole time. But I really, in hindsight, I feel like it drains a lot of energy from the team. Like it takes effort to be thinking about that all the time. Um, Now in the longer races, I try and look at it as, we want to stay relevant for, say it's a 5 or 6 day race for the first 3 or 4 days and not be as stressed about, you know what, it's actually better not being in the lead for a lot of the race and then coming from behind. The mental process you go through trying to stay in front is way worse. It's way more stressful than if you're picking your way up through the back of the pack and then start fighting for the lead because then you have momentum and you're feeling better. Whereas if you're in the lead for a long time and then you start to get caught, it's more a bit more demoralizing. So it's interesting the different ways you might interpret being at the front of the pack. But that's the strategy now, really. It's to stay relevant for the first, 80, 90% of the race. And then really everything happens on that last day in an expedition race, like the last 24 hours. That's where you want to, have some gas left in the tank and things like that. So, um, but at the same time, like even in the local races, like it's hard. I mean, it's a competition, right? So you're going to be competitive. You're going to be looking at other teams. And I think in the North American Championships, it was actually pretty jovial on course. There was a lot of chatting back and forth. I hadn't seen Marco for years, and we didn't get to see him much before the race. So we were chatting a bunch on the course and afterwards, and same with Mary. And then we had Lynn Bissett on our team last minute because my wife had a concussion at Wilderness Traverse and she couldn't race. And Lynn normally raced with the French team from Canada that was also at the front of the pack. So she was talking to those guys and there was a lot of kind of joking back and forth. And then probably it was lucky that we weren't with each other. Everyone took different strategies on that final trek. So there wasn't so much back and forth, but I'm sure it would have been a lot more stressful had we been together. Um, I see it when I do orienteering races. Like if I'm out there doing a race and I'm by myself and I'm, ticking along, everything's going well, and then all of a sudden another racer I've caught up to, or he's caught up to me or she, and then I make a mistake for some reason. So it's funny how that pressure creeps in when you get other teams around you. So yeah, it's interesting.
All right. So getting back into our previous conversation, I guess I want to just pick your brain on um, like how adventure racing has changed as you've been through the sport um, and we'll get into like what it sounds like, um, I mean, a thing I love about the sport is the friendliness of it and like getting to know people so that you can be chatting with them while you're racing against them. Everyone kind of gets to know almost everyone in these races eventually, but um, like, was it always like that, or what was it like when you first started out? Have things changed?
Uh, I think like the race courses and the racing is probably similar. I don't think that's changed very much. Um, it seems like there was a lot more sponsorship and probably more prize money back in the, early 2000s. So that maybe made things a bit more serious and more competitive. I shouldn't say more competitive because it's still very competitive, but teams were definitely taking things quite serious back then. But I also didn't know I didn't know as many people back then, so it would have been a different experience for me. And trying to gain, we're all always trying to gain, the respect of our peers and, to do well. So I think once that happened for me, it helped kind of calm things down, and then you could be more friendly and kind of joking around on the course. But then there's also the side where you're looking up to, like I looked up to a bunch of racers back in the day, and then you're racing alongside them, and it's kind of like, holy cow, or we're racing alongside these guys. There's that bit of, starstruck going on, whereas, it's kind of a funny environment to be in, but um, yeah. Uh, but I honestly, yeah, the racing's the same. Like, I don't think it's changed that much. The challenge is still there. Like the courses I'm designing now are the same ones I designed 20 years ago. Like nothing much has changed in that regard. So, um, yeah, we're still all gluttons for punishment for whatever reason.
Awesome. Well, I'm jealous that you got to race in Newfoundland and that there are all these races that existed and don't anymore. But I guess I just wanted to ask about the state of AR in Canada and North America. I mean, what do you feel like what the scene is like right now? I mean, besides the lack of sponsorship. I mean, what did you guys do with the $1 million prize you won from the ARWS championship? Did you spend it
Yeah,
all at once or have you saved some of
yeah,
it?
right. Um, yeah. So the funny thing is, you talk about being jealous about those old races, but like the races that happen now, it's the same thing. Like the races are always, these amazing event directors that take so much time to host these expedition races. Yeah, the opportunities are still there. The names change, but yeah, the racing I think is still very similar. So, yeah, I used to feel that way too when you're missing out on a certain race or this race, but especially when you're injured, I always tell people, there's always another adventure. There's always going to be another race. Don't stress about it too much. And there really are. I mean, look at the races that have happened over the last few years. That massive race they hosted, the last world champs in South Africa. I thought that was awesome. I was a bit envious that I wasn't down there, but just such a huge field, and they do such a great job with that race. So that was really cool to see. And yeah, a lot of the races that happen all over the world, it's like, yeah, you can't do them all. So, but yeah, I don't know I don't know how qualified I am. I think you might be more qualified to answer the question about the state of adventure racing in North America. And like, I can speak to Ontario. To be honest, I've kind of been focused on building, you know, adventure racing at a grassroots level, and getting more participants into wilderness traverse, and then maybe they can go on to participate in longer races, across the country or around the world. So that's really more been my focus. We had a longtime organizer in Ontario named Sean Roper. He hosted what would have been the biggest kind of like entry level race, retire from event directing. So I had to take over his race, or it was going to go away. So that's our what we call the Storm Adventure Race. It used to be Storm the Trent. So his last year hosting it, he had over 800 participants in an adventure race, which is pretty cool. You don't see adventure races that big as much anymore. So just trying to keep that going, growing that event, and then getting people up to Wilderness Traverse, and then kind of moving on to longer races has been my kind of focus. So in Ontario, we saw. I think it was like this across North America, but honestly, you probably know better. But we saw a boost after Eco Challenge came out in 2020. Unfortunately, the pandemic kind of hurt things, but then that boost has kind of maintained all the way through till even this past year. We were probably still 20% up on what we would have been in 2019. So numbers are better for adventure racing in our neck of the woods anyways, as far as participation goes. I mean, I look at the North America series and all the races we've got there now, and it's amazing. And I don't know, you know, a third of them I probably haven't heard of. But I'm seeing all these event directors stepping up and hosting events, and I just think it's really cool that there's that many. I was surprised more people didn't start organizing events in Canada over the last 3 years. I thought there would be more of a an uptick, but we didn't see much in Canada, unfortunately. But there actually are a couple new events. We're trying to help. There's actually going to be a short race with Wilderness Traverse happening on the same weekend that's being hosted by what was a team that participated in Wilderness Traverse over the years, and now they're going to step up and start organizing. It's going to be called the Apex Challenge, the Apex Adventure Race. He's just got his website up, and we're going to start helping him promote that. So we'll have a shorter race to go along with the North American champs that weekend. So yeah, really figuring out that grassroots level when there isn't the big media storm from a large race, which is probably why we're all talking right now. Like those old original eco challenges, Raid Galois, Primal Quests, they got a lot of us old guard into the sport. And it would be great if there was something out there like that happened every year. Whether we could do it around the World Championships or how it would look would be pretty cool.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, it's been really heartening to see all these new race directors pop up because several of the races that we started off doing back in the early 2010s, the race directors have kind of phased out or changed focus. And you always worry is that, you know, how's the sport going to continue? And it's been really heartening to see the new race directors come into the sport. And not to mention, so many people are just, like I said, lifers. Like they're in their 20th or 25th year of hosting these races, and it's pretty special to have that. And um, I think fundamentally adventure racing, while it's global and that's those events like the one that's happening with Worlds in Canada or South Africa or any of these bigger races are amazing to watch. What's going to keep the sport healthy and vibrant is that local grassroots uh, community driven development of the sport. And so I guess I'm curious, as we have 5 minutes left here, like how have you found success with that? Like what have you been doing to get Wilderness Traverse known in the community? And it has a great reputation in adventure racing, but it seems just so well attended. I mean, the Trent the Storm race, 800 people, that's crazy numbers. Like how have I know that's you're just taking it over this year, but how has Ontario and the community there managed to keep adventure racing so strong in the province?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we probably had one of the larger adventure racing communities in North America, even back in like the early 2000s with all of the events that were taking place. I bet you if someone looked at all of the adventure racing markets around North America at the time, Ontario was probably one of the largest, would be my guess. I mean, there's a pretty big population base in what we call the Golden Horseshoe, kind of from Toronto around to Hamilton and even out to west to London and some of the other cities there. Um, but I also think that canoe tripping background that we have, getting into the wilderness, getting outdoors helps to a degree for sure. So people are used to, we kind of call it going to cottage country. Everyone kind of drives north on the weekends to escape the city, is kind of how it goes around here. So there's probably a bit of that. And then, as you know, it takes a unique person that wants to put all those things together, the outdoors with their endurance challenge, and then combining all the different things. So, Yeah, to be honest, we could probably be doing more when it comes to getting new people into the races. There's also a really good, decent orienteering community in Ontario. One of the clubs, Don't Get Lost, has seen a lot of success. They have an adventure running kids program and then adventure running races, which is team-based but with navigation. So there is a good progression people can make into the sport as opposed to just jumping right into a longer race. Um, but yeah, to be honest, I think it's a legacy of, those older events that took place, and we've just tried to keep them going. But we're actually going to be bringing back an AR training weekend this spring, so geared towards both like mid packers to beginners. We're gonna probably have a couple streams happening over that weekend. So I used to do a lot more adventure race training. Kind of stepped away from it for a little bit, but we're going to bring that back with the team Canada Adventure is going to host it. So Ryan and Scott, myself, hopefully my wife can attend as well. We can figure out childcare for that weekend. So that's something we'll be looking at doing. And then we also run what we call an AR mentor program through Wilderness Traverse. So we have a group of about 20 experienced adventure racers, and they'll kind of do whatever a new team wants. Do they want just some advice on getting started? Do they want to meet up and do some navigation training? Kind of they let the new teams lead and let them know what they're looking for. And that's been successful, getting teams, started, but also finishing the events. As you know, there's so much to learn once you get started. So
Awesome, Bob. Well, thank you so much. We have one question from an audience member. What type of compass do you prefer, thumb or base plate, and any specific brand or model? Very specific question.
we've been this is timely. We've been arguing about this, not arguing, but like discussing this since the North American champs down in Pennsylvania. I mean, I don't want to throw Sunto under the bus, but my gosh, their needles don't settle near as good as they used to. I used to use a Sunto Global Compass. I think it was called the M2 or something. And I've used both base plate and thumb. So this is also the discussion we were having. This is a funny question. Um, but I've found the last few years I'm not as good following a bearing on a thumb compass anymore. I don't know what's going on, whether it's my eyesight and I had this problem we had a Canadian Championship event, orienteering event, not far from me, so I participated in this summer, and I was veering right like all the time. It was a really weird thing. So I've actually gone back to base plate, so base plate compass. And funny enough, I found an old compass, I think it was a Recta compass, was this old brand. They probably don't even make it anymore, but that was the compass that I used at the North American champs this year. But I'm gonna get some Silva compasses, some Silva base plate compasses, and see how their needles measure up. But to be honest, I haven't found the compass I'm going to use this year, but I've gone back to base plate for sure. I still sometimes use the thumb, but in an expedition race, I find the base plate, especially for longer races, lets me follow a bearing more accurately than a thumb compass would. Even the ones that you can set the bearing on the thumb compass, I just prefer the base plate, to be honest. And in that Pennsylvania race, the North American champs race, we were like being super diligent following our bearings between some of those checkpoints. So, and the way we normally do that is Scott or Ryan or someone will be out front, and then I'll be in the back making sure they're really dialed. And then if we're trying to be like super precise, I'll go to the front and we'll slow down quite a bit and we'll really make sure we're going straight. So that was a good question.
That's good advice for Abby and Brent's races. I would say their navigation is amongst the most um, difficult and requiring a precision of any race I've done. There's one in Wisconsin, Paula Waits races, where it's equally as demanding, but you can't be off with some of their navigation.
No, we should have probably been pace counting more in hindsight. We got, I wouldn't say lazy. Things were working, so we were kind of going with the system. I was using my watch to time my distances, and it was working out pretty smoothly. And then the checkpoint that tripped us up, um, we'd kind of gone into a valley and up a hill, and I was giving us some leeway on the time, where, we could have been there, but, well, only this much time has passed, so let's keep going a little bit further. Whereas if we had pace counted that distance as opposed to use the stopwatch, we probably would have stopped and found it a lot quicker. So we probably should have pace counted a few of those instead of just using the watch. So there you go.
It's always a tough call, and you want to do them all, but that's the slowest option. So, one last question, if I can hold you for another minute.
Yeah, for sure. I'm good. No worries.
Cool. So Brian asks, what's the main difference between planning orienteering legs and adventure racing legs from a course designing perspective?
I don't have a ton of experience setting orienteering courses, to be honest. A friend of mine, who's an ex like North American, Mike Waddington, ex North American orienteering champion, he has helped me set some wilderness traverse races and some courses. And talking to him through course setting is really neat, because those orienteers, they think a lot of things through, and they see all the angles for sure. So really, in adventure racing, when you're trying to move long distances, I choose my checkpoints a bit differently, probably. For wilderness traverse, the checkpoints are usually on quite large features. Where we are, there's a lot of lakes, so often checkpoints end up on the shores of lakes. But it would be rare to have a checkpoint on a feature that wasn't on like a lake that might be a kilometer long or something like that. So it's more in wilderness traverse, it's more about staying found within this large wilderness area. But then when you get to the checkpoint, it's going to be pretty obvious that you're there. Whereas, with orienteering, the detail on the maps, that's the other big difference. The detail of the maps that you have for orienteering races is incredibly better than the quality and the detail that we have for adventure racing. At least where we are, the orienteering maps, as most people know, they cover smaller areas, and unfortunately in Canada, our kind of map series is 1 to 50,000, which it's common all over the world. I know in the US you guys have 1 to 24,000, which can be a little bit nicer, a little bit better detail. But there's a lot missing on those 1 to 50,000 maps. And that becomes a part of the puzzle with the adventure racing, is knowing what you're going to see and what you're not going to see out there, and then not getting tripped up by the things that are out there but aren't on the maps. That's something teams usually learn the hard way. I had to learn those things the hard way when I first started navigating on 1 to 50,000 scale maps, for sure. Um, but yeah, I mean, you can just pick way more precise checkpoints in orienteering. But I think from a big picture perspective, you're still wanting there to be like multiple ways to get between checkpoints. So like I know I love the orienteering. There's a few websites, and they do things where they review past legs and like which way would you go, and then they show the replays of where the runners went. That's kind of the goal, is to have there be two or three options on how to get between legs. And we do the same thing with adventure racing. I always want there to be options and it not to be obvious. And when we're really lucky, we get that on our paddling legs too, where there could be like really big, different ways you can get around these series of islands or lakes, or there's, a chain that goes this way, a river that goes that way. And then the teams try and figure it out. So that's probably the similarity, is just trying to give those options.
Awesome. Well, I realized I hadn't asked anyone listening but not looking at the chat. If they want to ask any questions, you can either type them in the chat, or if you can unmute yourself, feel free to come off mute and ask a question. And if that's it, then we can wrap things up. Give it a second here. Again, thanks so much, Bob. When is Wilderness Traverse this year? You've moved the dates, eh?
Yeah, we're at the end of July. Geez, what is it? 27th, 28th weekend? Whatever the last weekend in July is. Might not have hit the dates perfectly, but yeah, we moved it to not conflict with the world champs, because that was being hosted when we would normally be hosting, at the end of September. And I know we've come into conflict with a few races in the northern US, which we apologize for. It was kind of unavoidable, unfortunately, but yeah, we're at the end of July, and yeah, we'd love to see. We're actually seeing really good response from, I think there's 6 or 7 US teams signed up already, whereas we normally get 2 or 3. So it's looking good for a North American championship.
Yeah, well,
We've
there's your
got,
top 6 or 7 right there. You could just
yeah,
call it
that's right.
now.
Uh, and we're also seeing teams. There's a couple teams from British Columbia signed up. So across Canada, there's always a bunch of teams from Quebec, but we're seeing good representation from, out west in Canada as well. So it's cool to see. I think this championship is going to take off, almost like the USARA champs you guys have going. I always admired how it had such a strong following, down in the US. So hopefully this takes on a similar life in the years ahead.
Yeah, I hope so. It's always tough with such a jammed in race calendar. That's the difficulty of North America is, there's really like 6 months you can race for most of the country, and it's tough to get all those races in the calendar without overlap. But we all make it work, and I think the biggest thing that I'm working on in my role is helping out with the Adventure Racing World Series North America series, which is a mouthful. Is just making sure everyone's on the same page and communicating, and everyone knows each other and knows how to reach each other, and just a feeling of like kind of, we're all in this together. Like let's and the response to that, I think, has been, as you'd expect from adventure racers, pretty great. Really amazing race directors to get to work with, including yourself. And I look forward to continuing to tighten the bonds of that community, and that involves going to other races and seeing how other race directors do it. And the biggest thing we're working on this year is this cross-border collaboration and getting more U.S. teams to Canada, getting more Canadian teams to the U.S. We've seen a great response of Canadian teams coming down to the main summer adventure race over the last couple of years, and we've got several Canadian teams signed up for our race this year. So I think for a while there was like a mental barrier there on top of a physical border, and we're hoping to break that down a little bit more. So here's to continuing that, and thank you so much, Bob, for your time. Good luck with the race, and you'll be going to Worlds as well, I assume.
That's the plan. I
Well,
hope
good luck
so.
there.
But yeah, no, thanks so much, Cliff, from the community for all you've been doing. I don't, maybe people know, I'm sure they do, but you've been a huge driver of bringing the North American series together. So huge thanks for that. Yeah, and I agree. I can't wait to attend more adventure races, and maybe we'll have to talk to Heidi about a 24-hour world championship at some point in the future.
Uh, they seem to be going the opposite direction, Bob. They're getting longer.
Who knows?
We'll see. Yeah, but like yeah, a separate 24-hour race could be cool. All right, plenty of things to think about, and we'll have to do it again sometime soon, and we'll get really deep on these philosophical questions of where adventure racing is and where it's going. But thanks to everyone for joining us tonight, and I'll be posting this shortly. It's been recorded, so yeah, tell your friends they can watch the recording. We'll try and get it out via our channels and YouTube. So thanks, Bob. Have a good night.
Awesome. You too. Thanks, Cliff.
Bye.